Hi, friends. Welcome to Direct Impact Broadcasting. The network of growth and transformation presents S.O.S For Leaders, where your host, Tywauna Wilson, will be sharing leadership and personal growth strategies. Let's jump right in.
Welcome to another episode of S.O.S For Leaders. I am your host, Tywauna Wilson. A little bit about myself in case you're tuning in for the very first time. I'm the founder and CEO of Trendy Elite Coaching and Consulting, where we develop the next generation of leaders so that they can be best in class. Specifically, we help those professionals land their dream role, get promoted, and paid their worth in the medical laboratory and healthcare industries. If this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much for landing on this podcast. Please do me a favor and share it out with somebody you think could benefit from hearing these practical tips that they can use in both their personal and professional life. And make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. If you are a returning guest, thank you so much for continuing to tune in and support this podcast. I really appreciate you. Continue to share it with your network and everybody you feel that could benefit, your friends, your colleagues, and all of those who will benefit from hearing this message. In today's podcast, we are going to talk about bouncing back after failure, especially giving you those 3 secrets where you can reclaim your confidence so that you're able to move forward. Winston Churchill once said that success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And when I thought about that quote, it made me think about all of the times that I had a failure and how I just kind of got down in the dumps and was like, wow, like this happened, this, another failure, this didn't go in my direction. And I was just thinking, how do I bounce back and still have the same level of enthusiasm? How can I still be excited even though I had such a failure? And if you've ever heard my story or heard my journey, you know that my career was almost canceled before it even got started. In my industry as a medical laboratory professional, I am a medical laboratory scientist. We are an industry that's regulated by certifications, and you need to have your certification really to work in any of our hospitals, especially. And so I graduated with my degree. It was time to take my certification test, and I studied. I landed my first job, and I went in to take my certification test and failed. And I was just like, okay, I didn't pass the test. I was pretty down, and I'm like, okay, I'll have to study, pay more money to take the certification test again, wait. And so I did. I took the certification test. I waited. At that time, you had to wait 3 months to retake it. You submit your money, and it was time to take the test again. And I went in there, and I was very confident that this time was going to be fine. I went in there and I took the test. It took me hours to take the test, and I clicked enter on that final question, and the screen said fail. And I'm like, whoa, wow, here we go again. Like, you mean to tell me I still didn't pass? And so by that time, my employer was getting a little bit antsy and kind of frustrated that I wasn't passing or hadn't passed the exam. And, it got to the point where they are like, if you don't pass by this date, then we're going to have to terminate your employment. And so, of course, I had to pay more money to take the certification test. I had to wait another 3 months before I could take it again. And so I only had one more chance to take the test. And if I didn't pass it on that time, then it would be past the time that my employer allowed me to continue working without a certification. And so I studied, I prayed, and I have to admit my enthusiasm was at a low, because it was like, I've given so much to try and be in this profession, to only have it to seem like it was getting ready to come to an end as quick as I got started. And so I studied, and I went in there for the third time, and I got a good night's rest. I studied and I ate a good breakfast, and I went in there, and hours later, after taking the test, and I hit the enter button this time, and it said pass. And so I was super grateful and excited. But going through that, I can tell you that, sometimes your confidence is shaken when things don't work out. If you submit for a job and you don't even get a call back, it's sometimes hard to keep that confidence up, because then you start to evaluate and think, well, is it me? Is it something that I'm doing? It's like those setbacks and disappointments have a way of knocking you down and taking your enthusiasm with it. It gets to a point where we start doubting ourselves and lose sight of who we really are and what we can even do. And without our confidence, it really becomes impossible to try, almost guaranteeing failure. So the good news is that, confidence can be reclaimed, as every successful person knows. And so today we're going to talk about 3 things that you can do to keep your confidence, especially as life gives you some setbacks. One secret or tip is to remind yourself that you can do it. Successful people recognize that failure is normal, and failure is part of the process, is part of the journey. Getting there won't be without bumps. I haven't met a successful person yet that can or will tell me that they haven't experienced some sort of failure or disappointment along the way. The important thing is, when you're trying to regain your confidence after you've had a setback, is to realize that success is still a possibility, or even a probability that it can still happen. So when I think about that, passing that certification, I knew that it was still possible. I knew that I just needed to keep reminding myself, no matter how many times it took, that it was still possible. And you have to remind yourself of what the goal is and visualize success all over and over and over and over again. So that's secret or tip number 1, is to remind yourself that you can do it. Secret or tip number 2 is keep a handle on what you're saying to yourself. Self-talk can be really destructive, especially to your confidence. How do you talk to yourself, especially when something goes wrong? Are you very hard on yourself? Are you patient and understanding? Or do you tend to be negative? Grabbing a hold of these mental strongholds will definitely help you, and those mental put downs will help preserve your self-confidence, using more positive statements that will help build you up. So even when I couldn't pass the test, I was still telling myself, you're smart, you're going to pass the test. It's just because you pass the test doesn't mean you can't pass the course. You can do it. You worked hard for this. You were meant for this. You just didn't pass it this time. You got it the next time. So keeping a handle on what you're saying to yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself, and where you don't forgive yourself for, some mistakes that may happen or failures that may happen along the way. So that would be tip number 2 that I would give you. And the last secret or tip would be to keep trying. Persistence pays off, for sure. I mean, if you don't believe that, look at my story. That was over 17 years ago that I couldn't pass the test. My colleagues laughed, and they were just like kind of cruel, because I couldn't pass the test. They made fun of me, and it was one of those things. It was, I'm not going to say that I was just, just excited because I wasn't, so it was one of those things that, as I was going through it, I was sad and disappointed, during those times, but I knew that in order for me to change the world, I had a vision so large for myself that I would be somebody that made a difference in the world and made an impact on the world. And that was my route in order to be able to do that. So I knew I had to be a scientist. I knew I had to pass the test. So even though I was frustrated and people were laughing and talking about me, I knew that I would get through it. I knew that if I kept trying, that it would all work out. And like I said, that was over 17 years ago, and I have, moved up through the ranks of the laboratory. I went from being on the bench to being a system director of many people, of several hospital laboratory locations, recognized in the profession and my community. And I don't say all of that to brag or anything like that. I say all of that to say that it doesn't matter how you start, but how you finish. You can start off on a rocky path, but it doesn't mean that you can't overcome that. And it all comes with keeping that persistence. If you fail and stop, you'll always think of yourself as a failure. But it's the person who gets up and tries again and again and again who builds confidence as they go. So really, the only way to reclaim your confidence, especially after a failure or when things didn't work out, is to put intentional work into recovering it. If you use these 3 secrets, these 3 tips that we talked about today, you'll definitely get there. Recognize the process can be sometimes slow at times, but success and having that confidence truly does still lie within your grasp, even after a setback. But you got to believe it. Do you believe it? Do you believe that you can still have that confidence even after a setback? I'm interested to know your thoughts on this. So if you could leave what you do to recover or regain your confidence after a failure or after a setback, if you could leave it in the comments, I would love to hear what you do so that I can use some of your tips to continue to encourage myself as well as I continue to go through life, and I'm sure continue to experience additional failures, because together we're better and we learn from each other. So just to recap, those 3 secrets or tips that you can use to reclaim your confidence after a failure or setback is to remind yourself that you can do it. Keep a handle on what you're saying to yourself. Be kind and forgive yourself. And the last secret or tip was to keep trying, keep going. Be like the little engine that could and just keep chugging along. So I hope you were able to get some practical tips from today's podcast. Again, if you could do me a favor and please share this podcast out with your friends and colleagues, especially if you have somebody in your circle that has had some failures, they've had some setbacks recently, and they're just struggling with trying to get their confidence back up. Maybe they have been out trying to apply for jobs and haven't been selected, or been interviewing for positions and haven't gotten a call back. Let them know it's part of the process, and it's going to be okay if they just keep moving along, if they just keep at it, if they just be persistent, and be careful what they tell themselves, if they stay positive even during that time. So thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, please share it out to anybody you feel could benefit. And until our next episode, I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of S.O.S For Leaders, where Tywauna shared nuggets of wisdom that you can use to win in life. Follow her on Facebook, Instagram, and connect on LinkedIn. And remember, the secrets of success in your life resides inside of you. When you know what your strengths are, you can utilize them to live an impactful and influential life.